السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الديمقراطيون الليبراليون في اسكتلندا من هم؟ وما مدى تمثيلهم في النسيج الاسكتلندي؟ وما هو موقفهم من الاستفتاء على استقلال اسكتلندا في ايلول المقبل؟ الديمقراطيون الليبراليون في اسكتلندا من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. هو من تمتع بسمعة طيبة منذ انتخابه نائبا في البرلمان الاسكتلندي، وعرف بتنفيذ مطالب ناخبيه وحل مشاكلهم منذ انتخابه عام 2006. هو ويللي ريني، قائد كتلة حزب الليبراليين الديمقراطيين الاسكتلنديين، ثالث كبرى الكتل في البرلمان الاسكتلندي. عام 2008 فاز ريني في انتخابات فرعية ليصبح لفترة قصيرة نائبا في ويستمنستر، وهو وكتلته جزء من حملة الأفضل معا للتصويت بلا في الاستفتاء على استقلال اسكتلندا عن المملكة المتحدة في ايلول سبتمبر المقبل. الليبراليون الديمقراطيون في اسكتلندا تعرضوا لانتكاسات سياسية كثيرة ومحرجة ترجمت أرقاما انحدرت تدريجيا في المقاعد الانتخابية لتصل إلى 5 مقاعد، بيد أن ذلك لم يثني هذا الحزب عن المتابعة في الصراخ عاليا من أجل قناعاتهم، معزين أنفسهم بتحالفهم مع حزب العمال الاسكتلندي ومجابهة التحديات والبقاء بحسب رأيهم على الضفة الصحيحة. النائب الاسكتلندي ويللي ريني كيف يشرح موقف حزبه من عملية الاستفتاء المقبلة على استقلال اسكتلندا، وكيف يمكن لكتلة الليبراليين الديمقراطيين أن تكون مؤثرة في هذا النقاش، وما هي أبرز محاذيرهم من عملية الانفصال، وهل حقيقة أن حكومتي ويستمنستر واسكتلندا سائرتان نحو التصادم قريبا؟ Member of the Scottish Parliament and leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Mr. Willie Ronnie, welcome to the Inside, sir. Actually, what can you tell us first? Who are the Liberal Democrats? What are the Liberal Democrats in Scotland? And what do they represent in the Scottish fabric?
I mean, Liberal Democrats in Scotland are part of a federation of Liberal Democrats across the United Kingdom. And we are kind of in favour of openness, freedom, fairness. That's our kind of fundamental principles. We're kind of suspicious of concentrations of power, whether that be in big business or in government. We're decentralisers, we want local power. We want people to be able to do what they want as long as it doesn't impact on the lives of other people. So it's that balancing freedoms and licence. That's what we're about.
But you know, these principles, most of the parties, when they come or they plan to come to power, they talk about these principles. How are you so different from the others in trying to put them into practice?
We have got a specific role in United Kingdom politics and Scottish politics. We tend to be the party of the centre ground, of a party that works in partnership with other people, and that's why we formed a government with the Conservatives, which were not our natural allies. With the Labour Party in Scotland, we formed alliances with them. We tend to be a party that's about partnership. And that's part of the whole fairness agenda. It's about being reasonable about your politics. It's not about the extremes. It's about a passionate centre. That's where we are. And we have been pretty successful, despite the voting system in the United Kingdom being biased against us because it goes for the bigger parties. Well, it's a first past the post system. So you need to have big blocks of votes, which we tend not to have. Our vote tends to be spread quite thinly across the country, but we still get about 15 to 20% in general elections, but that's not enough to get you over the barrier. So the voting system, it's not rigged, but it doesn't work in our favour. So, but despite that, we've been tremendously successful at getting high numbers of MPs into Parliament and in the Scottish Parliament, and that's why we're now in power. We
will get to this point later on, but tell me, how successful were you in Scotland?
Well, the last election was a disaster. We went from 16 MSPs to 5. And that was in part because we were in partnership with our natural enemies, actually, the Conservative Party in the UK government. And during a time.
Why did you go into this partnership?
She was mad at the time. But it was the right thing to do. I mean, the whole of Europe was beginning to crumble economically. There was riots in many cities in Greece and other capitals of the European Union. So it was important that we brought stability to the government in the United Kingdom back in 2010. The Labour Party were not in a fit state to form a partnership, so we went in with the Conservatives. That's what we did. We still believe it was the right decision to take, but actually people found it counterintuitive. They found it difficult to understand after years of battling with the Conservatives why we were suddenly in government with them. But we always believe...
So an alliance that cost you a number of seats.
Oh yeah, it did. Yeah. Large number of seats. But you don't come into politics just to be popular. You come into politics to do the right thing. If you're just going to chase populism, you don't tend to get very far in British politics because you tend to blow with the wind. What you need to do is have your principles, argue for them, do the right thing, and people in the long run
Is this what you have been doing, sir?
Absolutely.
Now, tell me a bit here, let the people a bit know about the issues that you tend to stand up for in the Scottish Parliament, the things that you stood up for and you attempted to achieve, and you achieved actually.
One of the most important issues for me and for Scotland just now is trying to crack the generations of poverty that exist in certain parts of our country. So in parts of Glasgow there are people, generations, grandchildren, father, grandfather, who have been unemployed. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is about the centralisation of our police force. We believe it should be decentralised. Communities should control our police rather than government in the centre. So we've been battling against that as well. And the third issue that we're campaigning for is more powers for this Scottish Parliament, because we again believe in decentralising power. We don't believe in independence. We don't want to separate off.
This is very paradoxical. I mean, you want a decentralised army and you want a decentralised power in the Scottish Parliament, and we will discuss also other issues about the fiscal dossier, the thing that you also fought for, but you also oppose independence at the same time.
Because we're not separatists. We don't believe in breaking off. We want partnership.
Do you think that independence means separatism?
Yes, it does.
For good?
Ultimately, yes, it does.
Okay.
I mean, because the beauty of a partnership is that you do things together. You can do things together by devolving power down. You can decentralise, give it away down to local level. But ultimately, you're a partnership and you decide what to do together. If you're separate, you have no control over your former partner. They can do whatever they want. It might be in their best interest to work in partnership, but there's no guarantee. We think there should be a guarantee. We think we should stay together in the UK in a decentralised form. I mean, we formed the European Union, this kind of economic area.
It's
which
disintegrating now.
Well, no, still, I mean, it's going through a rocky period, but it will
because
last.
of the economic crisis. The economic question is something which is very important nowadays.
Precisely, and countries are looking to come together, not to pull apart. Alliances, G8, G20, NATO, the European Union, these are all important alliances. Why do you want to kind of fragment those alliances? That's the opposite direction of travel.
Do you look at the UK as something which is similar to such kind of alliances? Like
yes.
the European Union, like the G20, like the NATO, like others. Is it similar in the sense, is it much grander?
It's a different alliance. I mean, it's more cemented. It's a constitutional alliance. It exists. You're cemented together, and that's a good thing. So it's slightly different from the European Union and NATO and all the rest of them. But the principle of partnership is at the centre of the United Kingdom, just like it is for NATO and the EU, the G8, the G20. All these organisations are looking to work in partnership, not disintegrate. And that's, we think, the direction of travel that Scotland should be going as well.
Now, you said, Mr. Ronnie, that Scottish Liberal Democrats and Liberals in Scotland have often been a lone voice. You echoed this in most of your speeches. Why?
I mean, we have been the outsiders in politics, although we are kind of the radical centre, as we would describe it. We're the outsiders, the ones that challenge, provoke, debate, trying to make sure that the establishment, the traditional forms, doesn't continue. We want to break up the traditional form. So often at the start you're on your own on these things, but that's the function that we perform about that challenge. So that's why we are often the lone voice. But the beauty about this lone voice is it's often right. and people come to our cause at a later stage, they realise that it's the right thing to do.
Mr. Rani, you are the leader of 5 MSPs that go under the umbrella of your Liberal Democratic Party. And my question here is, how could your group, this small number of people, 5 actually, how could it impact the political scene in Scotland?
Because we have clear positions, we have a message, we have something to deliver, we have an argument to make. We were the only party against the centralisation of the police. So we've got a unique voice in there. That's how we're heard. The media come to us because of that. In Parliament, they listen to us because we've got a unique position. We're not just like the rest, so therefore we have that place. But also because we're better. We're better than the other parties on these things. The quality of the people we have in our group is first class. And that's why we managed to punch above our weight in the Parliament.
But what about the impoverished? What about the other people who are not a first-class people? Yani, they don't agree with your politics, they don't agree with your approach, they don't listen to what you're saying, and thus they want to become under your umbrella?
Well, they do. I mean, people do.
Because as the numbers, you know, as you said, since the forming of the Scottish Parliament back in 1999, you were 17 MSPs, and then you were reduced to 16, and now it's only 5.
Yeah, I mean, it is temporary, is our view.
Yes.
It's going to
increase. We know in politics everything is temporary,
and it's all volatile. Parties go up and parties go down. The SNP in 2003 had their worst result ever, but yet only a few years later they came back into power. So these things fluctuate over time. We know from speaking to people on the doorsteps out in the communities, that they like what we've got to say. They don't like that we're with the Conservatives, but they like what we say. So therefore I have an inner belief that we are going to come back. And the evidence is that slowly but surely that's beginning to happen. On by-elections across the United Kingdom, we're beginning to win again. And that's not happened for some time. But the sign's there. And also with the economy improving, people are recognising that we made the right decisions back in 2010, so therefore they're sticking with us.
Do you believe and do you feel that Willie Rani stands up for all the Scottish people?
Yes.
So we should give up, I think, this language of quality.
Yeah, we're better than the other MSPs because I have absolute confidence.
The MSPs.
We have confidence in our parliamentarians in this Parliament. I think we punch above our weight because we have got good people in the Parliament who manage to have got a unique voice. We're confident about what we believe in, and we make sure that we prosecute that case. And that's why we're punching above our weight. If you speak to all the commentators in Scotland, they recognise we punch above our weight. And it's because we're good. And it's because we've got
and because that you speak out loud, you know, because you said something here that one thing you had learned from Westminster was how to shout out loud. Here, do we actually need, or do you actually need to shout out to pass through your ideas and your arguments in the Scottish Parliament?
I mean, you need to talk, I think, in politics in primary colours. You need to be very clear about what you are saying, what you stand for, who you stand for, and why you stand for that. And that's the way we conduct our politics, with respect, but certainly clearly. And that's what I learned from Westminster. There's a lot of people disagree with you and they will shout at you repeatedly, but unless you talk through the noise and make sure that people understand what you stand up for, that you're not going to be cowed by these people, even though they've got bigger numbers. If you don't have confidence in what you believe in, you're not going to get very far in politics.
Right, member of the Scottish Parliament and leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Mr. Willie Reni, allow us to stop now for a short break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، ابقوا معنا.
رئيس كتلة الليبراليين الديمقراطيين في البرلمان الاسكتلندي النائب ويللي ريني، ما تعريفه للليبراليين الديمقراطيين وكيف يفسر الانخفاض التدريجي لتمثيلهم في البرلمان الاسكتلندي في السنوات الماضية؟
I mean, a Liberal Democrat tends to be a bit of a troublemaker, a reasonable troublemaker in politics. We're the party that stands up for the little guy, make sure that the establishment doesn't just carry on like a juggernaut. We're the party that's kind of a bit anti-establishment. We stand up for good quality education. We stand up for an open society where people can do what they want as long as it doesn't impact on other people. People who are kind of educated, graduates, professionals, you know, people from more rural communities who are away from the kind of industrial centres, away from the concentrations of the trade unions, they tend to vote for us. They're a bit freer in their thinking. It's almost a way of life. It's that kind of tolerance, understanding of other people, but also challenging. The troublemakers, reasonable troublemakers of British politics, that's what we are.
Those are very attractive, those notions are very attractive, but the issue here is just, you know, very paradoxical. You tend to have all these attractive notions and ideas, and people or voters from this spectra of the society, yet the representation of the Liberal Democrats in the Scottish Parliament is slightly low.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
We talked about it, yes, but, you know, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a particular issue in Scotland about the Conservatives. The Conservatives, when Margaret Thatcher was in charge, were not popular in Scotland. There was actually a campaign in the 80s for people to vote tactically against the Conservatives. So we got a lot elected, SNP, and so did Labour, in order to stop the Conservatives winning here. And that was part of a kind of a movement against Margaret Thatcher's policies on things like the poll tax, the deindustrialisation. The attitude to Scotland was not good. So that legacy has got deep roots. And so any party that goes into government with that party, it rubs off of them, those kind of negative views and negative feelings, and that's what's happened to us.
Right.
But the challenge that we've got is to explain the purpose of going into forming that stable relationship to get the economy out of the difficulties that have been created. So we think we've got a good story to tell. The sacrifices we made for the good of the country, even going in with the Conservatives in order to do that, was something that was important to us. Because you go into politics to do the right things, rather than just remaining popular. Because being
even
popular,
if it will
that
cost
would be
you a
wrong.
lot, yes.
Yeah, because I think it's temporary. I think it will come back.
Allow me, sir, now to move on to the confusion that reigned over the forthcoming referendum concerning the independence. And it shows that the Scottish and the Westminster governments are seemingly on a collision course. How far is that true? And why?
I think the referendum is actually going to be good for Scotland, because it will help Scots and all the politicians and people from the rest of the UK to understand a little bit more about their country. So that's a good thing. So we should start off with a positive thing, that it actually will benefit Scotland to have gone through this process. What's bad is actually the forces of division might actually last for some time after the referendum. You know, we're getting challenged that you're not really a true Scot unless you're in favour of having a separate country. Now, I dispute that. I'm a proud Scot, I'm a proud Brit, I'm a proud European, but I don't think I should have to choose between all those labels and those identities. I want to be them all, but the SNP want to force me to choose between them.
The Scottish National Party.
The Scottish National Party want me to choose between those kind of identities. So I think that's the potential downside of it. I mean, there is a collision course between the Scottish Government and the UK Government, but so far the UK Government is winning. The referendum polls are showing that people are going to reject independence, and for me, that's a very positive thing.
What about the most recent opinion poll?
There was one opinion poll that had the independence movement ahead by 1 point, but it was a doubtful poll. I don't want to be complacent, but the polls are moving in the right direction, which is a good thing. But I think at the end of this process, I think what we'll have is more powers for the Scottish Parliament. I think we'll get a Parliament that is stronger. I mean, we don't hardly raise any taxes here. Now, any proper Parliament would be responsible for raising money as well as spending it, but this Parliament doesn't. Now, that's going to change in a couple of years' time, but it needs to be much more substantial powers that need to be transferred in order to make sure that people in Scotland can determine their own destiny in the domestic agenda, rather than just getting handouts from Westminster.
What kind of obstacles would be in face of the Scottish people in the case of independence?
I mean, I think the fundamental problem...
You mean that they can't be independent?
No. I mean, I've never disputed that Scotland could be independent. I just don't think it would be as good as what we've got just now. I mean, we've got one of the most successful political and economic unions that has existed on the planet with the United Kingdom. We've got an economy that's wrapped up together with Scotland. Why would you want to remove the levers to somebody else to decide, a foreign country, to decide the currency, to decide the regulations? I mean, a country that we trade, what, £45 billion worth of trade with the rest of the UK, and we want to make them foreigners? I think that's the last thing that we would want Scotland to have. I mean, the economy is really important to Scottish people. Why would we do anything to undermine that pretty strong economy that we're now developing?
Now, the campaign to keep Scotland within the UK, launched in Edinburgh, led by former Chancellor Alistair Darling, aims to, quote, promote the view that Scotland is a better and stronger country as part of the United Kingdom. The name of the campaign is Better Together, and it's an umbrella that comprises a lot of parties in Scotland. What can you tell us about this campaign, sir?
Well, it's a very positive campaign. We're putting forward messages about...
What do you mean by positive?
Well, I'll give you 3 examples. We have got a country that invented the National Health Service to look after the sick and the elderly. That shows that the United Kingdom is a compassionate country. It's not to say that Scotland wouldn't have an NHS, but it was the United Kingdom together, Scotland with the rest of the UK, that invented that. I think that shows compassion. We've got the second biggest aid budget in the world in the United Kingdom. Doesn't mean to say that Scotland wouldn't contribute to international aid, but it's recognised the United Kingdom has got one of the most effective aid operations in the world. That's a good thing. Shows we care about people from other parts of the world. And we've got an economy that's strong enough to be able to protect us from the banks when they collapsed. Now that economic strength is good for the United Kingdom. Now, we're not saying that Scotland wouldn't be able to be independent, it's just that the UK has got a proven track record, has ever existed, 300 years of working in partnership, and we think that should continue.
Right.
But we also want to decentralise power within the United Kingdom.
Allow me here to move on to something that you mentioned on September 2011. You explained the Home Rule Commission plan, saying, quote, "We now want to look towards developing a Home Rule Parliament where roughly the money that we would spend in the Parliament we would raise. That would give the Scottish Parliament control over its own destiny. It will allow it to shape the future of Scotland in a more independent-minded manner without actually separating Scotland from the rest of the UK."
The United Kingdom is one of the most centralised countries in Europe. I mean, there's very few countries that are like the UK where most of the power is in the central government. Actually, most of them devolve power, tax, and well as spending power. So what we want to do is just break the norm in the UK, form a powerful Scottish Parliament, a Home Rule Parliament as we would call it, which would be part of a federal United Kingdom, because we believe, as we've just discussed, the rest of the United Kingdom wants more power within their regions and nations as well. So we think our movement is the trigger for reforms to happen elsewhere too. So we've set out this ambition to raise the majority of the money that we spend in the Scottish Parliament, so you have much more control over your own destiny.
How could this be plausible?
Well, you can do, there's a number of different taxes, income tax, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, a whole range of them that brings you up to about 55–60% of the money that you spend would be raised by the Scottish Parliament. It would be a stable financial relationship, but it would give you much more control too. So we think it's the best of both worlds.
Why are you, to a certain extent, sir, and you in particular, such an ardent and tough opponent of the SNP, and you describe them as a bulldozer of the majority, and you want to stand up in their face?
Well, there is this kind of aggressive form of political movement that we have with the SNP. They challenge those Scots who are not in favour of independence as not being true Scots, as not somehow not loyal to their nation. And that's, I think, an insidious way to approach politics, challenging somebody's loyalty to their country that they've always lived in and they've always believed in.
It's as if you need a blood test.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of the nationalists are kind of what they call civic nationalists, very centre ground, very reasonable. But there's elements on the edge that do challenge in the way that I've described. Now that's what you do with nationalism. If you just lift the lid a little bit on it, you just don't know where it's going to go. You don't know how it's going to develop. That's why it's really important that we keep on top of these things.
Sir, why don't you resort to a kind of dialogue, for example, to try and come to grips with the pains on both sides?
Have you tried to talk to Alex Salmond?
No, never. But you try always to irritate him by something, because you had this controversy about the cartoon issue and something on your Facebook, and you said that no, I didn't want to publish it, but you did it actually.
Yeah.
So, and you try to put him in a one balance with Qatar, and that he has his own connections and liaisons, for example.
Yeah, that was a mistake, and I apologise for what happened there. It should never have gone out. I had never actually seen it before it went out, although I'm not blaming anybody else, I'm responsible, but it shouldn't have gone out. So that was an isolated issue. I actually try to balance things. Where I agree with the SNP, I'll work with them. Minimum pricing on alcohol. That was a proposal to actually have a minimum standard price, so we don't have these cut price drinks that encourage people to drink an awful lot more alcohol. I worked with them on that. I've worked with them on the budget. We agreed to reverse the cuts to colleges. It's good enough. I worked with them for that change. So, I don't always oppose. I'm quite passionate when I agree with them, but I'm passionate when I disagree as well, because it should be based on the issues. We have this saying in football, where you should play the ball and not the man. And I try to always play the ball. Even though I can be quite assertive when I'm doing so, it's important that you keep a focus on the policy rather than on the politician. And that's what we've always tried to do, because we're fair, reasonable but passionate politicians.
Right, member of the Scottish Parliament and leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Mr. Wيللي, Reni, many thanks indeed for this interview from the Parliament. From your office, sir.
And thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة، ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@الميادين.net من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من اسكتلندا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.